They held the retirement in a hotel ballroom that smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and reheated coffee. Everything about it was designed to be inoffensive: beige carpet, white tablecloths, a podium with the company logo projected softly behind it. The kind of room where nothing personal was supposed to happen. I arrived early and chose a chair near the aisle. I wanted a clear path out just in case. My father was already there, laughing with people who used his first name the way family once did. He wore the same navy suit he'd worn to my graduation, the one that made him look slimmer and more generous than he often was. I told myself I was calm, that I'd come only to witness the closing of something, that I owed myself the proof that I could sit through this and remain intact. For most of my life, my father's disappointments had been expressed as observations. He didn't rage. He didn't slam doors, he simply noticed things. That I wasn't decisive, that I lacked the instinct for leadership. That I worked hard, yes, but without the sharpness that mattered. My brothers were decisive. My brothers were sharp. When he said these things, he sounded almost regretful, as if reporting the weather. Over time, those observations hardened into truth, not just for him, but for everyone who heard him say them often enough. The speeches began. Colleagues shared anecdotes that softened him, made him sound patient, visionary. A man shaped by loyalty. I listened closely, not for praise or insult, but for the familiar undertow of erasure. It arrived right on schedule. I owe it all to my sons, my father said, smiling easily. They had what it takes. They carried my work forward. My daughter, well. He laughed lightly. She never really did. The room laughed with him. Then clapped. Applause has a way of finalizing things. It takes a sentence and turns it into a verdict. In that moment, I felt something inside me go quiet, not broken, not enraged, just resolved. The humiliation was clean, public, and unmistakable. There would be no later reinterpretation, no private correction. I stood. The sound of a chair scraping cut through the applause more sharply than I expected. A few heads turned. I walked to the front with a wrapped box I'd been holding beneath my chair, suddenly heavy in my hands. My father's smile faltered, not fear yet. Just confusion, I said. My voice didn't shake. From your biggest failure. I placed the box on the podium, nodded once, and turned away before anyone could respond. I didn't wait to see his face change. I didn't want the moment to become theater. I walked down the aisle, through the side door, and into the hallway where the carpet was darker and the lighting less forgiving. I heard nothing then. No shouting, no pursuit. Just the hum of the building's ventilation and my own breathing. Steady and surprising in its steadiness. I'd prepared the box months earlier, after a junior associate at the firm congratulated my brother for an internal system I had designed. He'd said it casually, assuming the credit trail was obvious. It wasn't. I went home that night and opened old files. Emails, drafts, metadata, contracts I'd signed without reading closely because I'd trusted my family to treat my work as mine. Trust is a generous thing. It leaves records. What I placed in that box were copies, formal, verified, of design documents, internal proposals, and correspondence that traced the company's most profitable operational overhaul back to me. There were notarized statements from vendors who'd worked directly with me. A timeline that made attribution unavoidable. On top of it all, a letter requesting formal review under the company's own intellectual property and compensation policies. I didn't include a note explaining any of this. I'd learned that explanations invited argument. The documents spoke in a language my father respected: process, liability, proof. I didn't hear about what happened next until later. I was already in my car, hands resting on the steering wheel, when my phone buzzed with messages I didn't read. I drove home instead. By the time I checked my voicemail that evening, the story had assembled itself. My father had opened the box expecting sentiment. Maybe a watch. A plaque. When he realized what it was, his voice rose, not in grief, but in panic. He shouted about betrayal. About misunderstanding, about how this wasn't the place. It was then that someone from HR stepped forward. Then legal. The room, which had been primed for celebration, froze into procedure. The applause dissolved into murmurs. Security closed the doors, not dramatically, just firmly, the way they do when something requires containment. Authority has a particular sound when it enters a room. Not loud. Certain. An internal review was announced. Meetings postponed. My father's speech ended unfinished, the microphone still warm when they turned it off. Over the next few weeks, emails arrived with neutral subject lines. Requests for clarification, invitations to discuss. I attended them all, remotely, professionally. I answered questions. I provided corroboration. I did not editorialize, my father did not contact me. The review concluded quietly. My name was added where it had always belonged. Compensation was adjusted retroactively. A public correction was issued, not about me, but about misattribution of internal contributions. Language careful enough to protect the company, precise enough to protect me. My father's advisory role ended earlier than planned. Officially for health reasons, people asked how I felt. They seemed to expect relief, or triumph, or a visible sense of justice. What I felt was narrower than that. A small alignment. Like stand-in after years of leaning without realizing it. The relationship didn't heal. It didn't collapse further either, it simply stopped pretending. There were no apologies, no late-night calls filled with regret. Just distance. Clarified. Sometimes I think about that room again. The clapping. The way a single sentence can undo years of private effort. I think about how close I came to believing that silence was dignity. I still don't enjoy confrontation. I still prefer rooms where nothing personal is supposed to happen. But I no longer mistake invisibility for peace. What I reclaimed that wasn't revenge. It was authorship. And once you have that, you don't need to scream to be heard.